I was a very curious little boy. Even then I searched for provable facts. I had to see the things spoken of by others for myself, and be able to physically touch them before accepting them. I could not immediately accept what others claimed to be right. Some of the things I was told to do were those I personally did not want to, and so did completely the opposite. If you wish to consider my childhood as a rebellious one, I will not be offended. Let me give you an example. When we were told that there was a great God who was waiting for us little boys to do wrong things so that he could write down our terrible sins in his book of life. Was it to punish us later? However, I preferred to do right things, primarily to please my mother. I did not want to please an invisible, therefore non-existent individual in the heavens who was ever ready to punish people. If you were like me, you would certainly realize why I dared not say anything like that, for fear of what we had been inflicted with, forced to follow too many rules and regulations. For they apparently knew that God punished people with awful things for their iniquities. According to the stories we grew up with, there was also a devil who only told lies and opposed everything good. But I believed that everything we were told were only stories, and not real. I was often told that I always seemed to do the opposite due to being completely brainless, incapable of thinking, slow, and idiotic. These were also the words my father used when describing me to his friends. They were uttered in such a sarcastic manner that I got hurt emotionally, often retreating to a silent corner on my own to cry. I believe this initially contributed to my so-called rebellious nature. Like my brother, I too was very sensitive. Although my young cousins were very good in skillfully hurting us, they were never chastised. But I will not blame them for their behavior, which I believe was encouraged by my father. Others regularly told me that I was a rebel, but if that was so, perhaps one could understand why. One may call it an extremely chaotic and very confused childhood. As previously mentioned, in my adult years I conducted research into my ancestral background and was surprised about the fragmented information in regard to some distant relatives who once lived in India, others settling in Norway, and others, like one of our uncles, my mother's brother, who settled in Beirut, Lebanon, and many others scattered around France. Yet I still question what the actual reality is. My cousins later preferred to live in Berlin, Germany, and I was told that Madeleine, my aunt's tragically murdered husband's brother's stepdaughter, had married somewhere in Great Britain, but was now living in Izmir, Turkey. Long before my remarkable journey, I remember going to the local shops with Madeleine when I was helping her uncle. She was very friendly to me, although very shy, and I enjoyed her company. Her birth father was Pierre, who died at a very young age. Madeleine, or Madeleine, was born in 1945, like my brother. For a long time, I thought that some of my relatives did not see the importance of telling me what they knew, perhaps thinking of my brother and me as being brainless youths. not needing to know anything. This is how I remember being introduced to others and laughed at by one of my cousins. Some still might erroneously consider us in the same light today. I wonder if they were considered the same way as they thought of us, how they would take it. On the other hand, they might have thought of us being too young to understand. I can only hope that they have never experienced what I was subjected to. Amongst all these places I felt more at home when in France, and from time to time I still feel homesick. However, I have learned to love all the countries I frequented or lived in, but France still remains the home of my youth. Many years later, when visiting Paris, I met highly influential people. One gentleman from the French Parliament, whose daughter I was befriended with, personally spoke to me at length on a special occasion when I tried to explain my dilemma in regard to my father, who was bent on the idea of staying in Turkey, although he was once desirous to settle back in France, just like some of his distant relatives. I can never forget my father's watery eyes when he uttered the words, "Help me, son, help me to get back to where we can live a life without fear," confusing me further. Here was a man who wanted to get rid of his sons, now perhaps crying for lost opportunities. Why did he elect to stay in Turkey when he had other options in the first place? What a change of heart. After finishing his politically flavored speech, the parliamentarian sat back in his chair by the large round table we were directed to. Beautiful food was served, and guests enjoyed ballroom dancing. I cannot forget the occasion, the atmosphere, and the things spoken. I remember my formal attire and thought that I probably looked like a well-dressed penguin. He spoke gently, saying, "My young baron, for us you are a true Frenchman, contrary to what others may claim. In that other country, Armenians and almost all other nationalities are looked down on. We are well aware of the situation. Armenians were never welcomed there after the 1915s, and they have been forced to change their names to survive, for fear of being discovered. Here you are always welcome." Here was a man of substance, who was knowledgeable about the history. I can never forget his words when he said, "We had to rescue Armenians from the tyranny they were inflicted with, and provide them with asylum. We were happy to oblige, and, to our surprise, they were quickly assimilated into our society. They were now living a life of freedom, and, as French citizens, many of them achieved greatness in artistic endeavors, established businesses, and great fashion industries." He explained that the French never undermined the contributions of Armenians, and never supportive of racism, as in some countries where one needed to suppress one's rights. I was yet to discover so much more about this issue. As mentioned before, I cannot forget his words even after all these years. "My young friend, you are our brother, our citizen, an important member of our society." How wonderful it was to hear something like this. Whether you are born here or elsewhere, including the place where your innocents were slaughtered, you need to understand this. As long as our way of living is respected, I say you are one of us, and we love you. It still amazes me what else can be remembered. Those words were etched so strongly in my mind that it brings tears to my eyes, and it only needs little triggers to recall what seems to be completely forgotten. Although what was spoken may not be remembered on a word-by-word basis, the essence of what was said remains. It just takes one simple memory of some significance to recall every other detail. However, let me tell you yet another story relating to my supposedly rebellious nature. While still at primary school and during one of the school holidays, we were advised never to visit the local graveyard without adult supervision, for allegedly there were spirits of people wandering about, ever ready to scare us. I could not understand why were they ready to scare us. However, many people, especially senior ladies dressed in black, frequented the place, which was in ruins, and the authorities did nothing about it, perhaps due to funding issues. There was an elderly, very thin and tall gentleman who looked after that place. People used to burn candles and offer prayers there, although they were not necessarily related to those buried therein, just hoping that by doing what they did traditionally on a daily basis, they would receive the blessings of those resting in peace and the assistance of angels. One assumes that they had many reasons, as they all spoke of the same things, to find some relief to their problems, be it marital, financial, or health. My brother and I were just the same as other kids who liked to frequent that place because all those lit candles looked so fascinating. We were yet to learn that such a practice originated from ancient times, when people worshipped other deities and ancestral spirits. Just around the corner there was a spring, complete with a huge faucet and a bowl attached to it, with a chain for the traveler to drink refreshing cool water from, and which constantly flowed. On the right-hand corner of the cobblestone ground there were rather large potholes. One of them was the deepest, darkest, and most unusual. One evening I noticed a brilliant purple incandescent light flashing slowly at regular intervals, and thought perhaps some people were repairing the road surface. I was fascinated with the idea and wanted to watch people at work. Later, when frequenting the place with my brother, nothing could be seen, and that hall was pitch black. Was I perhaps dreaming whilst awake? When we mentioned it to our mother and a few other adults, they all strictly advised us that there may be some devils, jinns, or other undesirables, and we should never go there alone. We were strictly instructed not to visit that place for fear of possible harm, but I doubted if my mother really believed the stories. Like my brother, and having a very rebellious spirit, I had to go and investigate the source of those lights sometime soon. I was not willing to disturb the spirits of the dead, but as soon as I had the opportunity I went there, unafraid. I wanted to know who or what those devils looked like, if it was true. When frequenting the area in question, I did not experience anything other than just total calm. And there were no devils or other people coming out of the ground. Although on arrival I experienced little shivers down my neck, remembering what we had been warned about. There was nothing to worry, and I thought maybe I should visit this place again in a different time. My fears subsided, and I was very relaxed with it. Others kept advising me not to go to that hole in the ground, as they suspected that, according to the news, a few young kids had disappeared recently. Who knew? Perhaps the jinns may have abducted them. For me to be taken away would not present any problem, as I wanted to escape from my father's tyranny. However, thinking of my mother made me consider otherwise. I remembered their advice about visiting the place with adult supervision being a better choice, but they probably had no understanding and certainly no feeling about what a little boy was interested in. My mother was busy, and the cousins could only laugh at me, considering me somewhat lacking in intelligence. My friends were uninterested, and my brother was the only person I could talk to about these matters, but he was too young and busy with his homework. Even when I wanted to go there with somebody else, I was strictly advised to pray to God to send his holy angels for protection against any ill fate. However, even at that young age, those kinds of practices or superstitions seemed to be simple and unintelligent. I decided to go alone despite all the warnings about some very strange-looking creatures taking people away, for it did not make any sense. Obviously, the stories told to us children were to protect us from possible harm. However, I felt that if I was to disappear, it would please my father immensely. I kept visiting those holes in the ground, sometimes extending a tiny stick I was carrying, and sometimes putting my hands in them directly to feel the cool breeze inside. For a while I tried my childish experiments without avail.